A single statement from Tokyo just triggered the most devastating economic retaliation Asia has seen in a decade. Within 24 hours, Japan's stock markets were in freefall, supply chains were freezing, and billions in trade hung in the balance. This isn't just another diplomatic row. This is the moment the rules of power in Asia fundamentally changed. And what comes next will affect every major economy on Earth. The miscalculation. Here's what happened. A senior Japanese official made public remarks about Taiwan. The statement wasn't particularly aggressive by historical standards. But Beijing's response was immediate and brutal. China rolled out export restrictions covering over 800 categories of goods, military and dual-use items. But here's the strategic genius. The language was deliberately vague, giving Beijing maximum flexibility to tighten or loosen the screws at will. Japan's stock market dropped 1.2% in a single session. Billions evaporated as investors realized every supply chain assumption they'd been operating on just became obsolete. The message was unmistakable. Political positioning now carries immediate economic costs, and China controls the payment system. Japan's perfect storm. The timing couldn't be worse for Tokyo. Japan's economy contracted 1.8% last quarter, the first decline in 6 quarters. And that was before China's retaliation hit. Prime Minister Kishida resigned. Ishiba followed. The current government is operating with almost zero political capital during the worst economic crisis in a generation. Government debt sits above 230% of GDP. The 30-year bond yield just hit a record 3.52%. When you're carrying that much debt, rising borrowing costs don't just hurt, they threaten your entire financial structure. Now look at the trade imbalance. Japan imported $167 billion from China last year, 23% of all imports, $48 billion in electronics alone, another $30 billion in industrial machinery. These aren't luxury items you can substitute. These are the components that keep factories running every single day. China's exposure to Japan? Roughly 5%. Japan's exposure to China? 20%. The leverage is completely one-sided. Tourism is another pressure point already being activated. 7.5 million Chinese tourists visited Japan through September. Add Hong Kong and that jumps to 9.3 million, representing 7% of Japan's entire economy. When China issued travel warnings, cosmetics giant Shiseido crashed 11% in one day. Hotels, airlines, and retailers are bracing for a collapse that could last months. The rare earth chokehold. But the real weapon China hasn't fully deployed yet? Rare earth elements. Japan imports 72% of its rare earths from China. These materials are essential for electric vehicles, semiconductors, and defense systems. Without them, modern technology cannot be built. China controls nearly 100% of gallium and magnesium production, the majority of rare earth refining capacity worldwide, and 70% of the global magnet market. Japan just announced a $110 billion stimulus focused on semiconductors and electric vehicles. Every element of this plan depends on materials China controls. Economic models show a 3-month rare earth disruption would cost Japan $4.2 billion. Extend it to a year, Japan faces outright recession. America's broken promise. You'd think Japan could turn to America for help. They're treaty allies after all. But America is drowning in its own crisis, and it's self-inflicted. Trump's tariff regime was supposed to rebuild American manufacturing. Instead, the world's largest aluminum producer just called the U.S. market broken and imposed a $2,000 premium on shipments. Steel and copper imports face duties over 30%. Canada redirected aluminum exports to Europe where prices are stable. U.S. supplies are tightening and prices have nearly doubled compared to European markets. This is catastrophic because America needs over $1 trillion in new industrial capacity for AI and advanced computing. Every chip plant and data center requires materials that are now prohibitively expensive because of tariffs. The infrastructure funding gap stands at $3.7 trillion. Every dollar of industrial output now requires $2 in spending, making American manufacturing less competitive even as tariffs were meant to protect it. Then there's Trump's proposal for $2,000 stimulus checks to over 100 million Americans, costing between $300 and $600 billion in new borrowing on top of $38 trillion in existing debt. America can't rescue Japan because America can't rescue itself. The naval base that rewrote Asia. While everyone watched trade wars, something happened in Cambodia that fundamentally changed the strategic map, and most people missed it entirely. In April 2025, the Ream naval base became fully operational. 80 years of American naval dominance in the Indo-Pacific just ended. Here's why this matters. 67% of China's oil imports pass through the Malacca Strait, a passage barely 2.7 kilometers wide. $2 billion in cargo moves through daily. 87,000 vessels squeezed through last year. A classified U.S. report calculated that if this strait closed, China's economy would collapse in 90 days. The U.S. and India built a surveillance network specifically to exploit this vulnerability. India deployed monitoring systems in the Andaman Islands. The U.S. 7th Fleet stationed at Singapore. Every Chinese oil tanker became a tracked target. China tried land alternatives, the China-Pakistan corridor, the China-Myanmar pipelines. Combined, they handle less than 15% of what the Malacca route carries. Then came Ream. Sitting 400 kilometers from the Malacca Strait in Cambodia, this Chinese-funded base can berth aircraft carriers and Type 075 amphibious assault ships. Before Ream, Chinese nuclear submarines needed 5 to 7 days to reach the Indian Ocean from Hainan Island. Now? 12 hours to the Malacca Strait. 3 days to India's eastern coast. The strategic advantage just reversed. India's carrier needs 5 days from Kolkata. The reaction gap shifted from India leading by 3 days to China leading by 2. India's response shows their panic. They're fast-tracking $16 billion in submarine procurement through 2035, bringing nuclear sub-delivery forward by 3 years. But the numbers are brutal. China has 12 nuclear submarines. India has 2. By 2035, even if India has 6, China will have 20. Ream's true brilliance shows when paired with Djibouti. Djibouti controls the Red Sea exit. Ream covers the Malacca Strait. 6,000 kilometers apart, they form a logistics chain spanning the entire Indian Ocean. While military bases were being built, something even bigger was happening in global finance. Trump threatened 150% tariffs on any BRICS nation trying to replace the dollar. He declared BRICS finished, but Russia and China just announced 99.1% of their trade settles in rubles and yuan, almost $0. This isn't temporary. This is the end of the dollar's 80-year monopoly on global trade. India-Russia, 90% local currency. Brazil-China, yuan-real settlements. Iran-Russia, 95% rubles and rials. Malaysia-India, moving to rupees. We're talking trillions in commerce that never touches the U.S. financial system. China's cross-border interbank payment system now connects 4,800 banks across 185 countries. In January, CIPS processed $24.5 trillion in transactions, approaching America's total GDP. The yuan's share in global payments doubled since 2022. It's now used in 50% of BRICS trade. Central banks bought 1,450 metric tons of gold last year, third straight year above 1,000 tons. They're reducing dollar reliance. Every Trump threat tells countries their sovereignty depends on the dollar system. But sovereign nations don't like ultimatums. After Trump's BRICS threat, Brazil invited Mexico, Uruguay, and Colombia to summits. Nigeria joined. Indonesia became the first Southeast Asian member. Trump's threats aren't killing BRICS. They're the best recruiting tool it's ever had. Here's a quick history lesson. In 1948, the British pound held twice the dollar's reserve share. By 1980, just 32 years later, the pound had collapsed to 2%. Why? Fiscal irresponsibility, currency instability, and a rising challenger. Sound familiar? America runs $2 trillion deficits, pays over $1 trillion in debt interest, while BRICS nations representing 35.6% of global GDP build alternative infrastructure. When enough trade moves from dollars, those dollars flood back to America, driving inflation. The Fed faces an impossible choice: print money and destroy purchasing power, or raise rates and trigger recession. Inside a Shenzhen lab, something Silicon Valley said was impossible just happened. Chinese scientists built a working extreme ultraviolet lithography prototype, the most complex machine humanity has ever created. Only one company has ever mastered EUV ASML in the Netherlands. Their machines cost up to $400 million, weigh 180 tons, and took 2 decades to perfect. Without EUV, you cannot make advanced chips for phones, AI, or weapons. Since 2019, the US blocked all EUV sales to China. In April, ASML's CEO said China needed many years to develop this. He was spectacularly wrong. Reuters confirmed the machine is operational and generating EUV light. It hasn't made chips yet, but its existence is a seismic shift. The project ran like a spy operation. Former ASML engineers recruited under false names, signing bonuses up to $700,000. Workers told no one could know what they were building. Lin Nan, formerly ASML's head of light source technology, led the effort. His team achieved 3.42% conversion efficiency, beating Dutch research centers at 3.2%. ASML acknowledged in its annual report that a former employee misappropriated proprietary technology in China. But once he returned, enforcement was impossible. China's approach differs from ASML's. They're using solid-state lasers instead of CO2 lasers, building on Chinese strengths in solid-state technology, where they hold 34% of global patents. The biggest challenge? Replicating Carl Zeiss's ultra-precision optics. But the Changchun Institute just integrated EUV light into functional optical systems, still behind Zeiss, but advancing fast. This is China's Manhattan Project for semiconductors. Thousands of engineers coordinated by Huawei under Xi Jinping's direct supervision. Beijing targets 2028 for working chips. Realistic timeline, 2030. Still years ahead of Western predictions. The impact? ASML stock crashed 15%, largest drop since '98. China revenue collapsed from 49% to 20% of sales. Growth projections slowed to 6%. By cutting China off from EUV, America created exactly what it feared: a competitor forced to innovate who no longer needs Western permission. October 9, 2025. China's Ministry of Commerce dropped a bombshell. Sweeping export controls on rare earth elements. Target? ASML. China controls 90% of rare earth processing. ASML's EUV machines depend on Chinese rare earths for magnets, optics, and laser components. New rule. Any product with 0.1% or more Chinese rare earths needs Beijing's export approval. And China applied the foreign direct product rule. Even if built outside China with Chinese materials, Beijing controls where it goes. ASML manufactures in the Netherlands using parts from multiple countries. But if any component contains Chinese rare earths, and they almost certainly do, Beijing now has veto power over sales. China didn't just respond to restrictions. It proved you cannot cut China out of technology without China cutting you out of critical materials. Message to Japan, South Korea, Europe. Aligning with US tech restrictions carries economic costs you may not afford. Japan made a calculation and lost. A political statement about Taiwan triggered comprehensive economic warfare. 800 product categories restricted. Tourism collapsing. Rare earths threatened. Stock markets falling. No good options. America can't help. Drowning in tariff chaos with trillions in infrastructure gaps and a Fed trapped between inflation and recession. Ream Naval Base erased 80 years of maritime dominance. Strategic geometry reversed in China's favor. India scrambling, but the numbers don't lie. China will have 20 nuclear subs when India has 6. The dollar's monopoly is ending. 99% Russia-China settlement without dollars. CEP's processing transactions rivaling US GDP. Gold reserves at records. BRICS expanding despite threats. The semiconductor wall is breaking. EUV prototypes operational. Efficiency surpassing Dutch research. Indigenous capability emerging a decade early. And rare earth controls creating reciprocal leverage, proving supply chains run both ways. The West assumed economic interdependence created permanent leverage. That tech superiority was insurmountable. That financial architecture was irreplaceable. That military presence guaranteed dominance. China is dismantling each assumption. Not through confrontation, through alternatives. Not destruction, construction. Building payment systems, securing strategic positions, developing indigenous technology, weaponizing resource control. The question isn't whether this transformation happens. It's already happening. The question is whether the West adapts fast enough, whether Japan learns political gestures carry unaffordable costs, whether America realizes threats accelerate de-dollarization, whether Europe understands restrictions create competitor innovation. Right now, the evidence says no. And that's the most dangerous miscalculation of all. Because in this new world, economic leverage beats military alliances, supply chain control beats naval fleets, and offering alternatives in currency, technology, and strategy determines who shapes the century. Japan just learned this the hard way. The world is watching.